Hello, everyone. Sorry, it wasn't working on my phone for some reason, and I have a better camera there. I'm going to try in just a couple more minutes get it on my phone, the live feed, and then we'll be able to start. Can you all see me? Can you all hear me? Just type in the chat if you can. Testing, testing. Cool. All right. All right, I think I'll just do with this camera then, because the phone isn't really working out. I'm just going to connect my earphone for a second. That way the sound quality will be better. Just a moment. Okay, how's the sound quality now? Can you all hear me better? Let's see, how am I going to make a good background here? I expected the phone to be on the tripod to be a little higher. Okay. Ah, we have a Ruski tavarish. Okay, just a moment. Gonna get my notes out. Okay. All right, just one more second. All right, let's see. All right, perfect. Well, sorry about the delay, guys. Like I said, I was having some sort of technical delay. I was trying to put the video on my phone so the video quality would be better, but I guess that's not going to work out this time. You know, only second time doing these lives, so hopefully by the next time or the time after, we'll have it down packed. So today I wanted to do a live because there was a startling bit of news that I ran into this week, and probably a lot of you have already read about it. You probably saw it in the description that I put for this live in my post on Twitter and on YouTube, that the U.S. Department of Commerce reported that the real GDP decrease in the second economic quarter for the United States fell at an annual rate of 32%. This is actually the worst decline in GDP in recent or in modern U.S. history. So this is actually a historic moment that we're living in right now, for better or for worse, obviously for worse. And I just wanted to talk about that. I wanted to talk about what's resulting from this, who's winning out, and obviously who's hurting as a result of the economic downturn that we're seeing with the COVID-19 pandemic, the response to it, and of course, the economic crisis that was inevitable. It was going to happen whether the pandemic came or not, but the pandemic was certainly a catalyst for this economic disaster that capitalism has brought upon us. So first I wanted to talk about the Marxist theory of overproduction, which in Marxism, of course, is the systemic problem of capitalism that inevitably leads to cyclical crises, like the one we're experiencing now, actually. I mean, on the surface, if you just look at it, you could think, okay, the pandemic has caused this, and no doubt it was a catalyst for these negative economic events to take place, but it was actually just it's a contributing factor. It's not the root cause of it. And I wanted to talk about a Marxist understanding of the root causes of crises. So I'm going to go through basically Marxist theory of overproduction. You guys chime in whenever you want in the chat to add things, ask questions. I'll try to balance between the talk and the chat as much as possible. And at the end, I'll definitely answer any questions or have some back and forth with you guys, what you want to talk about regarding Marxist theory, Marxism, Leninism, what's going on today, stuff in Russia, random stuff if you have any questions like we did before. So, okay, let's get right into it. First of all, let's talk about overproduction. Basically, in Marxism, the fundamental factor in capitalism's underlying tendency towards economic crisis, that means economic recessions and depressions, can be generally described as the systemic imbalance in capitalism between the productive forces and their consumption, which is really what Marx specifically calls the capitalist crisis of overproduction. According to Marx, it's the crisis, this is the root of capitalist crisis in the business cycle. So basically, I'm going to go first, before we talk about overproduction, I want to talk about one of the major actually misinterpretations of what overproduction is. A lot of times people confuse overproduction with underconsumption, and that's actually a different concept. Underconsumption is the concept that workers can't buy back the full value of commodities they produce as a consequence of profit, right? Profit is when the capitalist makes money because they don't return the full amount of value that a worker has created in the workplace, because they take that as their surplus value. So workers in the form of wages get back less value than they create at the workplace. That's the only way the capitalist can remain profitable. That's the only way he can make money to reinvest further into more capital so that he can expand the business and compete with other capitalists. Now, this is a factor of crises, no doubt, that workers can't consume the full output of capitalist enterprises, but this is actually not what overproduction means in Marxist theory. This is only sort of consequence of the recession that comes from true overproduction, which I'll get to in a minute. Another problem with misunderstanding that falling consumer demand is specifically overproduction is that that's actually the theoretical basis for Keynesian economics, which is not Marxism, obviously. Just for those who don't know, Keynesian economics is a form of liberal economics that is predicated on what Keynes called counter-cyclical public spending. So basically, it's demand-side economics, and the idea was pitched to American and British governments during the Great Depression to stimulate consumer-based economic growth, basically. And if you want to read more about that, he wrote The Means to Prosperity, and in 1933 that was published. But going to Marx, it's understandable how people could think about overproduction as underconsumption, because there is a quote from Capital Volume 2 where Marx says, the last cause of all real crises always remains the poverty and restricted consumption of the masses, as compared to the tendency of capitalist production to develop the productive forces in such a way that that only the absolute power of consumption of the entire society would be their limit. But when put into better context, we can understand where that's coming from. So, just a moment here. Anyway, back to Keynesianism. Just a second. I got a little sidetracked here. So Keynes basically approached the his ideas basically extended the lifespan of the capitalist system by changing the capitalists' attitudes towards what the state does. At first, before Keynes, before the Great Depression, before World War II, obviously capitalists saw the government as an institution that should hold a monopoly on violence to protect the status quo of capitalists doing business, but should not directly interfere in the government. Now, when Keynesian economics became popular, their attitude towards the government became sort of like it should be an institution that should protect the capitalist class not only from external threats to the system, like people who want to change the system, like communists, socialists, or whatever, but also that it should help the capitalist class protect itself from the consequences inherent in the system's flaws, like the business cycle that continually destroys businesses and centralizes capital in the hands of fewer and fewer businesses. So really at the core of this difference is that Keynesianism sees the driving force behind economic activity as consumer demand, whereas Marxism sees exploited labor central to the capitalists' pursuit of never-ending increasing profit within the confines of limited markets. So basically, Keynesianism is centered around consumer demand, whereas Marxism focuses on labor, which is the center of all value. Labor is what creates all value in an economy. So there's a good quote from Capital Volume 2 I wanted to mention to this point. It first becomes evident, Marx says, not in the direct reduction of consumer demand, the demand for individual consumption, but rather in a decline in the number of exchanges of capital in the reproduction process of capital. So Marx is basically saying that it's actually, it's not the lack of consumption of consumer goods that's the main cause of these economic crisis, cyclical economic crisis in capitalism, but the reduction in demand or the consumption of exchanging of capital, actually. So it's actually that when capital can no longer produce itself efficiently, this is when we get the consequences of overproduction, the overproduction of capital. There's too much capital in circulation that it becomes a barrier to itself to be reproduced. So let's see. So basically the way capitalists solve the overproduction of capital when there becomes too much of it in a market is, well, they have several solutions for this. The main one in our day and age is imperialism, basically, the export of capital that you can read more about in Vladimir Lenin's Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, where he talks about the transition of an industrial capitalist society into a finance capital society, a society run by giant monopolies, which we're living in today, where finance capital is at the head. So the way capitalists export this excess capital that would otherwise lead to crisis in the first world is through multinational megacorporations that have the power to do so. In our day and age, it's globalization, and they've even the capitalists are even successful in outsourcing labor to the third world, which in Lenin's time was not actually possible. It was primarily imperialism was mainly focused around labor resource exploitation in the third world, but around the 1980s, that changed, where a higher level of exploitation was made possible through through outsourcing of jobs from the first world, manufacturing jobs specifically, from the first world to the third world. Another aspect of, well, something that happens as a result of overproduction that you can see in the run-up to economic crises that Marx talks about in Capital Volume 2 is actually the rise of a lot of the average wage of workers right before the recession, when the economy takes a dive. So I'll read you this quote from Capital 2, Volume 2, where it says, and here Marx is contrasting the underconsumption ideology with the underconsumption concept with the overproduction concept. So he says, it is sheer redundancy to say that crises are produced by the lack of paying consumption or paying consumers. The capitalist system recognizes only paying consumers, with the exception of those in receipt of poor law support or the rogues. When commodities are unsaleable, that it simply means that there are no purchasers or consumers for them. When people attempt to give this redundancy an appearance of some deeper meaning by saying that the working class does not receive enough of its own product and that the evil would be dispelled immediately if received a greater share, more specifically, if its wages were increased, all one can say is that crises are invariably preceded by periods in which wages in general rise and the working class receives a relatively greater share of the annual product intended for consumption. From the standpoint of these valiant upholders of, quote, plain common sense, such periods should prevent the coming of crises. It would appear, therefore, that capitalist production includes conditions which are independent of goodwill or bad will. Now, basically, he's talking about here that recessions aren't the direct outcome of workers not being able to buy back all of the commodities that the capitalists produce, because in reality, this is actually a permanent condition of capitalism. Even during the boom times, there's many workers who cannot buy back the total output of capitalist society. You know, there are homes, and there are empty homes, and there are homeless people. There are people who go hungry, and yet supermarkets throw away their produce. This is a constant of capitalism. But, excuse me, right now, an example of this kind of increase of wages that came right in the run-up to this current crisis we're experiencing is actually something that the Trump administration has bragged about a lot, that the Trump administration has taken credit for. There's statistics that we can't doubt their validity of, that I'll read them to you right now. Over the past 2 years, workers in construction and manufacturing saw bonus wage growth, actually, of 18% and 23% respectively. Workers in lower wage leisure and hospitality industries saw their bonuses jump by 83%. Now, of course, in the short term, Donald Trump and his administration can attribute this to his policies, because under the Obama administration, the economy was just coming out of the 2008 recession. And it's also the Marxist understanding that after recessions, the amount of jobs that are created afterwards tend to have lower wages, and the reserve army of labor, or the unemployed, the reserve army of labor is the Marxist term for unemployment, is a lot higher at the end of a recession and throughout a recession. And this creates a higher competition for these jobs, thus lowering wages. But so on the run-up, we see that under Donald Trump's administration, there was actually higher working class wages than previously seen. But with the Marxist understanding, that's nothing out of the ordinary, as we just saw from Capital Volume 2. And another thing, actually, we can see that in the Trump administration's policies, and specifically, we're talking about here, of course, lowering taxes for capitalists and these kind of supply side capitalist economic policies that are pretty normal for right wingers. This actually accelerated the rate at which economic inequality was increasing in the United States, and that's according to the Census Bureau that says in 2018 actually it reached its highest point ever according to its indicators. And this is also another common indication of a pre-recession economy, much higher than average economic inequality in a country, especially around the world, which we also have seen across the world, a significant rise in economic inequality. So Marx talks about how the outcome of these cyclical crises is the intensified accumulation of capital in the hands of those capitalists who survive the ordeal, as well as the destruction of many petty capitalists. This is the last quote I'm going to throw at you for today, but it's relevant, and then we're going to get into how all this stuff ties into what's going on right now. So Marx also says it's the concentration of capitals already formed, destruction of their individual independence, expropriation of capitalist by capitalist, transformation of many small into few large capitals. It always ends in the ruin of many small capitalists whose capitals partly pass into the hands of their conquerors, partly vanish. So basically, in layman's terms, this means that many small businesses are destroyed in the midst of a recession, and their holdings are mostly concentrated into the hands of fewer and fewer capitalists who, from the beginning, had an advantage anyway. So this is exactly what we're seeing specifically, throughout, of course, all economic crises in American history, but specifically throughout the one that we're seeing right now is a concentration of wealth in the hands of the capitalists who are already fabulously successful before this crisis, and the destruction of many, many small businesses. So, of course, the GDP decrease, the historic GDP decrease that I mentioned at the beginning of the video is a statistic representation of that. Another statistical representation of that is the extraordinary growth of the reserve army of labor that we've seen so rapidly since the beginning of this pandemic and economic crisis. I'll just give you an update to that. Of these numbers. Basically, over the last week, the amount of unemployed, or the amount of people that filed for unemployment insurance in the United States, increased by another 1.3 million. So that leaves the current total of unemployed in the United States at 54.1 million people since the beginning of this crisis. That's according to USA Today. It's an unbelievable amount of people, and right now, if you Google the unemployment rate in the United States, it'll say something around like 12 to 13%. But that's a serious understatement of really how many people are unemployed around the country right now. Because remember, official bourgeois statistics about the unemployment rate only count people who were recently unemployed and are considered still looking for work, and are, have not given up the search and have become lumpenproletariat, or have already tried to deject themselves from the system. That, if you count those people, which are, when you think about it, actually unemployed as well, the number is a lot higher. And even if you don't count those people and you look at specific cities, many cities individually have already breached the 20% unemployment rate, which is around the level of the Great Depression. So, and this has gone hand in hand as well with the closing of many small businesses all over the country, to the benefit of giant monopolies like Amazon and Walmart. They're continuing to corner the markets that they already had heavily monopolized in. Since before this pandemic. So you can imagine that they would be completely in favor of the lockdown. I mean, Jeff Bezos has already come out publicly in favor of the lockdown and all of the coronavirus handling measures that basically eliminate his competition. I mean, Amazon sells everything, delivers to people's door, even food they do for Amazon Prime members. So the monopolization that Amazon has been able to take part in even extends throughout many industries, probably to a greater extent than Lenin or Marx had ever seen in their times. And also Apple as well has benefited from this. They saw major quarterly gains in profits. And it's so basically, you know, these corporations, these monopolies are able to centralize wealth to a significant degree under their jurisdiction in these recessions, especially. So for them, they want these recessions to go on as long as possible. They're making record profits. And this is exactly what Marx talks about in Capital Volume 2 specifically, and what you know, the centralization and monopolization of capital Lenin talks a lot about in his book about imperialism. Now, if you want to read about some more examples of specifically overproduction that happened right before this crisis, specifically in 2019, I can suggest to you guys an article called "The Capitalist Pandemic, Coronavirus, and the Economic Crisis." It's written by a French leftist named Eric Toussaint from the Committee of the Abolition of Illegitimate Debt. I came across that in my research. I found it quite interesting. He talks about overproduction that took place at the second half of 2019 in Germany, Italy, Japan, South Africa, and Argentina, among other countries, specifically in manufacturing. And when, you know, manufacturing is a labor-intensive industry, so this is something that this is an industry that's you know, tied to the well-being of the world economy, no doubt. So we can talk more about that after I'm done. If you guys want to ask some questions about that in the chat section, but I also wanted to talk about in brief some socialist solutions to this inevitable cycle of crisis in capitalism. Now, of course, it's easier said than done. I mean, socialist countries have had plenty of problems in their own time, but they also had a lot of achievements in solving this problem. Now, of course, the most straightforward idea is to rationally plan the means of production under public ownership. That eliminates the rat race of increasing profits and reproduction of capital to, you know, for the capitalists do for their very survival. I mean, they have no choice but to rapidly reproduce the means of production. Otherwise, they would go out of business. So in a rationally planned economy under public ownership, that won't be necessary. Of course, the economy would also be able to be based on satisfying, first and foremost, the human need, the production of commodities for human need rather than the profit of capitalists. And this would, you know, eliminate the anarchy of the law of value and commodity production that dominates economic activity in capitalism. There would need to be a state plan for the development of industry that would be done for the benefit of the population, to make sure everyone's housed, to make sure everyone gets food, to make sure everyone's needs are met. I think the best example of a socialist economy that's avoided the cyclical consequences of capitalist development is, of course, the USSR during the Great Depression. It's the most straightforward example of this. Of course, the Great Depression was a terrible economic downturn that negatively affected the entire capitalist world during the 1930s. But actually, in the USSR, because they separated themselves from the world, the global capitalist economic system, they actually experienced some of the highest growth numbers that out of the entire country's history. This was because they had a rational plan that allowed them to decide they wanted to make houses for people. They wanted to expand coal production, expand steel production for the purposes of making the country's economy better, not for the production of profit, which, under the Russian Tsar before the Soviet Union, they had plenty of opportunity for the profit motive to develop, but it did not in the same way that it developed in the West. And the reason for that is because the West developed industry and became imperial powers much sooner, and Russia ended up following the capitalist path of production much later than the Western powers. That's all I have to say about the crisis, and talking about Marxist understanding of overproduction as the cause of these economic crises, and the general socialist idea of how to solve these. So maybe we could have a discussion in the message board about some stuff I spoke about, ideas, anything. Anything to discuss about Marxist theory or the history of socialist countries and how they dealt with these thoughts on the 500K strong protests in Germany. Are you talking about the anti-coronavirus stuff? The anti-coronavirus measures? I guess I'll give my thoughts on the lockdown and the anti-coronavirus measures and all that stuff. I mean, there's a lot of ideas that are circulating around that the disease is overhyped and that it's sort of a conspiracy or whatnot. I don't think the coronavirus is a conspiracy. I think it's a serious pandemic that the world has to deal with. I mean, otherwise, why would North Korea, why would China, why would communist countries in the world have to be dealing with it? People have died from coronavirus there too. And when North Korea suspected that someone might have had the disease in the country, the country was immediately shut down for a day to make sure that there was not an outbreak. I think if it wasn't real, there wouldn't be any problem like that. But I do think that the capitalists, the richest capitalists, the globalists, the top 1% of the capitalist class, richer beyond belief than even Donald Trump, like Jeff Bezos, for example, those kinds of people obviously have a vested interest in continuing the lockdown for as long as possible, because they're the only people who win out in a recession situation, in conditions that the lockdown is creating, recession conditions that the lockdown creates. Because, Amazon can continue delivering food to people's doors. Walmart can continue staying open and being the retail giant that supplies all your lockdown needs. But this is what I mean. You're right. The 1% is too much. It's actually the 0.000001%. This is who I'm talking about. They can afford this, and they actually profit from it. As you can see by Amazon's record profits this week and Apple's super high profits. So we should definitely be wary of these liberal elites and their constant calls for extended lockdowns and all this stuff, overhyping of the coronavirus. That's true too. But as Marxists, we have to approach it from a scientific standpoint and dialectical materialist standpoint. And I think it's safe to assume that the coronavirus is still dangerous. But what's the problem? The problem is that the capitalist mode of production cannot coordinate in an organized manner to deal with the economic consequences of being under lockdown at a time like this. Socialist economies can, because the government, when the means of production are under public ownership, the government can coordinate things. But in capitalism, I mean, the global supply chains are in danger of falling apart. So let's see. What are Marxist stances towards small business owners, and would they be allowed to exist in socialist society? This is a good question. And you ask, what are Marxist stances towards small businesses? Well, Marxists, a lot of Marxists disagree. My Marxist standpoint on it is that, there's not really a problem with small businesses. In fact, actually, under the times of Stalin, actually, a lot of people don't know, but there was a thriving legal small business area of the economy, specifically in the 1950s. That actually, under Khrushchev, they did away with them, and that actually caused economic harm to the USSR. It's part of Khrushchev's. It's part of Khrushchev. It was part of Khrushchev's ideological project to bring the Soviet Union into the bright communist future by 1980. He was looking farther than the actual Soviet Union was. He had big ideas, but the Soviet Union was just not at that level of development at the time. The concept of commodity fetishism. So, actually, that's a good question. Last time I read about commodity fetishism, if you want to read more about it yourself, by the way, it's volume 1 of Capital, and it's one of the first chapters. So, but I don't want to give you wrong information, because, to be honest, my memory of what Marx talks about commodity fetishism in Capital volume 1 is actually a bit hazy. But he kind of compares it to the way in primitive communist societies, people worshipped idols of gods, and that commodity fetishism is basically the translation of that notion onto commodities in capitalist society. I guess I guess an example of it can be how people are obsessed with their iPhones, or they're obsessed with the consumption of commodities. It basically becomes a religion for people, and this is kind of what the gist of commodity fetishism is. But you can really read more about it in Capital Volume 1. Someone claims Russia is a financial fortress right now. Can you elaborate on that? Yeah, I can elaborate on that because I've done a couple reports on this, actually. Basically, this idea started before the actual pandemic, and the actually, maybe it was at the beginning of the pandemic. I can't really remember, but this idea started when the oil stuff began earlier this year, when Saudi Arabia crashed the price of oil, and there was a disagreement between Russia and Saudi Arabia in OPEC on how to handle the price of oil and all that. And the Russian government had said that, we have plenty of reserves, oil, gold, foreign currency reserves, to wait out any kind of crisis. This was, again, during the oil dispute. Now a greater economic crisis has developed, and this claim by the Russian government does extend to the current crisis. Another thing to keep in mind is that another thing that happened this week is that China and Russia dropped their dollar reserves down to less than 50% of their reserves of foreign currencies, I think it was. So this is another step towards to self-reliance of the countries, and a step away from reliance on the Western global economic system, global capitalist economic system. And Russia also has a lot of gold reserves as well. They've been amassing a mass of gold reserves over the past several years. I think it's the part of the Russian government strategy to get themselves not so dependent on a global economic system in which the United States has so much pull. Okay. Yeah, I think David Harvey. Okay, the question: thoughts on David Harvey as a good interpreter of Marxist Capital? Yeah, I think David Harvey is a good interpreter of Marxist Capital. He's a really talented political economist, and sometimes when I don't entirely understand things about Marxist Capital, I look at David Harvey's videos, especially for the basics. If you want to know the basics about capital, you should watch David Harvey's videos if you don't want to go and read Marxist Capital. It is like pretty tough to get through. It's pretty dense. So, for example, on commodity fetishism, I remember watching his videos on commodity fetishism. Check out David Harvey for that. It'll definitely be useful. Why is Belarus becoming anti-Russia when there is a US-backed color revolution happening in Belarus as we speak? Can you clarify the question? Do you mean the Belarusian government? Or do you mean the Belarusian people? Because I have been following the news over there about how there's all of a sudden been some spontaneous protests against Lukashenko and the government there. So what do you mean Belarus has become anti-Russia? What specifically? Because I'm pretty sure the Belarusian government is still quite friendly with Moscow. Lukashenko has always been pretty friendly with Putin. Maybe something happened very recently that I didn't catch in the news. All right, I'll go to this next question, and then I'll come back to the Belarus question of Belarus. Will there possibly be a new Red Scare as we step into the next big crisis? I don't think there will be another Red Scare, just because the problem is that the left is not really organized anywhere in the Western world, right? I mean, we have organizations like Antifa, sure, but I wouldn't really call that a disciplined, centralized organization that used to be that there needed to be Red Scares against. Like they're really adventurous anarchists, and I think, to be honest, the 0.0001% that is really in charge of Western politics and that actually are against Donald Trump right now, because Donald Trump represents a strata of the capitalist class that loses out in these recessions. So I'm talking about the capitalist class of Jeff Bezos. Their main enemy right now is actually the right wing. Right-wing populism, I would say. This is why we're seeing. This is why we're seeing a lot of policies. I mean, in Western Europe, not so much in America because Trump is in power right now, but that the right-wing populists are very against. Especially with the lockdown measures and especially with liberal policy and everything. I'm going to go on to another question here. Okay, if you could summarize explaining what a commodity is to a layperson, how would you do so? That's a simple one. A commodity is anything produced by the means of production for the sale, for the purpose of sale. So a commodity is something that's engaged in a trade relation. That's it. So if I I don't know, if I print this book for the purpose of selling it to you for like $5, this is a commodity. But if I produce it for the sake of me reading it, and I'm not going to sell it to anyone, then it's not a commodity. Maybe I should go into use value and exchange value in another one of my videos. It would be good to talk about. The U.S. Department of Defense and the U.S. Navy both claim to have documented off-world vehicles. Your thoughts on this? I haven't read about that. I can't say I know anything about it. I mean, I doubt it, but maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I don't know. I do believe aliens exist somewhere out there. It's much more logical to conclude that than to think that we're the center of the universe. But so Russian mercenaries planning to disrupt the election. This is just part of this, this narrative that Russia is trying to destroy the American way of life. I mean, it's just the next Russiagate, and it's just the next Russian trolls are trying to capture the election. It's what the liberals make up when they can't admit that their own mistakes are the reasons that they lost an election. Okay, well, all right, I'll go a little bit into use value and exchange value. So I was hoping that you could go into use value, exchange value, and explaining what a commodity is. All right, well, in Marxist theory, use value, a commodity has two conditions, two values. There's the use value and there's the exchange value. The use value, I think giving an example would be the best for you. I'll use the example of a book again. So this is the commodity, right? I produce this for the purpose of sale. It's Red Dawn. It's the communist Superman book. So I produce this for the purpose of selling it to someone else. But it's a book. So its use value is what value it has for use, right? Its use value is that it can be read and give someone joy for the story it has inside. Its use value has to do with its physical qualities, like it's hard, it's made of plastic or whatever. Exchange value is the value it has on when it's sold in a transaction, and this is not directly tied to the physical qualities of the commodity. But again, the thing that distinguishes an item from a commodity, like just any old item, and an item that's a commodity, is its presence in an exchange relation. It has to be in a relation of exchange. The Navy released the video of a UFO a few months ago. I saw this video that you're talking about, but there's really no. I also read about it. Everyone's basically saying like there's no way to verify it was really like an interstellar or alien thing. There was some. I read about it months ago. Actually, I did a report on it. You could find it on my YouTube channel because it was actually released quite a while ago, longer than a few months ago, actually. That it had something to do with these new goggles or this new visual equipment that the Navy was using, where it was a glitch in their system. Of course, they could just be making that up, but how? I mean, there's no way I can know that. Thoughts on Passadism? I think it's funny. I think it's pretty cool. I think they should continue to be Passadists. It's just kind of like a meme on the left, which kind of all Trotskyists are, but they're a special version of it. This is interesting. I would like to talk about this. Billionaires are in favor of UBI, obviously because they'll find a way to make it back into their pockets, Elon Musk, for example. But how UBI will this, but how universal basic income, will this speed or not the crisis? Okay, I think I understand what you're asking. So basically, billionaires are in favor of universal basic income, while, and I would say the richest of the billionaires, like Warren Buffett level, Jeff Bezos level, those kinds of, I mean, I don't know if they specifically support UBI. I haven't read that specifically, but this strata of billionaires is typically, are typically the rich people who support this. Why? Because they understand that that the continued accumulation of capital, the continuation of these economic crises, is reducing farther and farther the share of labor in the world's wealth. And, you know, at first, the capitalists used to make concessions to avoid working class revolt in the form of welfare states, in the form of universal health care, in the form of, welfare programs. Now, obviously, that's not enough. And these rich, very, very rich capitalists can afford to pay this universal basic income if it means the preservation of the capitalist system, if it means the preservation of their position in society, when in reality, it makes so much more sense for the masses of people to have the economy be run by the public, rather than have this weird exchange of, profit goes to the capitalist and he's got to reinvest it, and then he also gives some back to the workers after he already paid them a wage in the form of universal basic income. It's just some sort another bandage on the capitalist system. Obviously, the less rich capitalists like Donald Trump and those people don't want that, because, I mean, they're going to have to. They're trying to stay afloat as capitalists as much as possible. They can't really afford to pay into giant welfare projects like that. Western Europe will only be quasi-socialist. They will never implement true Marxist and communist ideology economics. Things are too many different types of immigrants and different types of people. Well, I mean, I'm of the ideology that socialism is not going to be able. Socialism needs to be brought through a revolutionary change. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean violent, crazy revolution, but the capitalists in power are not just going to usher in socialism on their own accord. Thoughts on Hungary, Poland, and the Baltic states gradually turning into fascism. I'm writing a book right now on populism and leftism and rightism in the 21st century, and this is a specific point I'm touching. I personally think that there is a significant difference between the right-wing populist movements, and don't get me wrong, I don't like either of them, but there's a significant difference between the right-wing populist movements that Viktor Orban or Duda in Poland are members of, and fascist movements that would bring countries to fascism. I think the fascist movements, like, for example, the alt-right that we see in the United States, that a lot of them, have modern fascistic tendencies. There are parallels to that in these countries, but they're not aligned with the right-wing populist governments. Of course, these right-wing populist governments are xenophobic. They're in Poland they have anti-abortion policies and whatnot. But these are constantly attacked by the liberal press in the European Union. But these are not even the biggest issues with these right-wing populist governments. The biggest issues with them are that, number one, they have laws that literally oppress any type of communist imagery or organization. In Hungary, they had them, but then they got rid of them because they determined that communists were not a threat. In Poland, they still have these laws, and people literally have been persecuted under them. People, you can watch one of my videos of someone who his name is Marcin Adam. He was the former editor of the Polish Communist Party's newspaper, and he received a fine for using communist imagery. That's it. So that stuff, obviously, the European Union and the liberals are silent about because they don't care about communists. But another big problem is that these populists, like, they seem to have this anti-liberal agenda and everything, and they talk crap on the European Union, and the European Union talks crap on them. But in reality, they're playing this balancing act between the West and the East. They want to have the military protection of NATO against Russia and be hostile to them. At the same time, they want to, stave off European Union liberalism for some, far-flung hopes of reasserting the nation like they once did. Like in Poland, for example, the Polish-Lithuanian Empire. The current Polish government is obsessed with the history of the Polish-Lithuanian Empire, and like they aspire to this time when Poland was this great, powerful nation. But in reality, they were an empire. Like, that shouldn't be brought back. So what are your thoughts on Nazi conspiracy theories against the Soviet Union, such as Jewish Bolshevism and cultural Marxism? Well, obviously, Jewish Bolshevism is just the ridiculous Nazi concept. I mean, there's no good ideological sound basis. I mean, there's no sound basis to that ideology. There were lots of Jews in the Communist Party in the USSR, sure, but that's fine. And I don't know. Is it too much to call for Jews to have equal rights with the rest of everyone else? I mean, cultural Marxism. I don't like the way the right uses this as like a sort of talking point, but some of the stuff they include in cultural Marxism, like I guess identity politics and Marxism that has no sort of basis in class that we see, that's like pretty much that the line between that and liberalism is blurred. I don't like that. I mean, and a lot of right-wing people associate that political tendency with cultural Marxism. But in general, the concept of cultural Marxism, I think, is not really a thing. Would you agree that the fundamental problem with capitalism is that it's a system that has no captain at the helm, i.e. a system nearly totally out of control of anyone regardless of class? Well, I mean, it's a system under the control of the capitalist class. I wouldn't say there's no one at the helm because you can read Lenin's Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. He talks about this, and this is the case, actually. Capitalist monopolies organized themselves into what at that time was cartels. What it is now is, they form mergers and they're on board of directors and they have their elite clubs like the Bilderberg Club or whatever, where they actually coordinate economic activity. They divide the spoils amongst themselves. I mean, like Amazon and Walmart, you can bet that they're cooperating in how they're going to be divvying up the markets. They don't really compete with each other. The real competition is gone. The competition of early capitalism, free competition between small businesses and this and that, that's a thing of the past. So I would say that there is a captain at the helm, and that's the richest of the rich the richest of the capitalist class, the 0.0001%, that I would call the globalists. Just curious, if the ruling class refuses to introduce socialism through reform, what then might be the alternative to armed revolution? Well, I mean, I'll give you an example. In the Russian Revolution, the revolution itself was not actually violent. The power was taken by the working class, and the civil war that ensued was actually because reactionary elements came back to fight a civil war. But the civil war does not necessarily need to ensue a revolution. There's the two are not intrinsically connected. But there's no alternative to like actual revolution. Like in this sense, I mean the change of the property relations of society through government change that's not through the official elections. Perhaps dual power, like this was a strategy by the Bolsheviks before the formation of the USSR, where they formed their own autonomous government organizations in St. Petersburg. That was Petrograd at the time, and this was a way to show the working class that their own political organizations could be successful. Good points by Gentle Ginjit, or Gentle Ginjit, sorry if I didn't say it correctly, about cultural Bolshevism and the totalitarianism label. Do you agree that the horseshoe theory is ridiculous? Yeah, of course I do. This is just like a liberal invention. I mean, it's liberals trying to rationalize in their head what they believe. But I mean, what's the similarity between fascism and communism? The liberals argue that the reason they're similar is because they claim that both governments killed people, or like both governments used government authority to accomplish things. I mean, all governments kill people. They have a monopoly on violence. It's not good or bad, but that doesn't make fascism and communism similar. Thoughts on Stalin's supposed anti-Semitism, such as the Doctor's Plot and the Night of the Murdered Poets. There's a couple more questions related to this topic of Stalin and anti-Semitism and the anti-cosmopolitan campaigns. Well, I'm going to say that the anti-cosmopolitan campaigns are basically the sum of the events that are being mentioned in the chat, as well as other things that the West accuses Stalin of anti-Semitism for. All I got to say about that is that the anti-Semitism in the Soviet Union was illegal. You could go to jail for that, and people were sent to jail for anti-Semitism. The anti-cosmopolitan campaigns did not target Jews. There were people who were targeted in these campaigns that were not Jewish. Did Jews fall? Were Jews accused of wrongdoing during the anti-cosmopolitan campaigns by people? Of course. Actually, anti-Semitism and bigotry was never eradicated in the Soviet Union, but the achievement was that it was seriously suppressed, and it was taken out of the mainstream, and the government made it a policy to encourage friendship of the peoples and discourage bigotry and anti-Semitism, but it never actually went away. But would I say that Stalin was anti-Semitic? No, there's no evidence of that. Would I say that the anti-cosmopolitan campaigns were anti-Semitic? I don't think I would. No. Yeah, Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Yeah, sorry about that. That's true, Will. Thank you for the correction. What countries do you see in our current day and age with the most revolutionary potential for socialism? The United States, to be honest. I mean, call me a dreamer, but and I know that at the time of the USSR and the Russian Revolution, Marx originally had the conception that the socialist revolutions would happen in the most advanced capitalist countries. So around the time of 1917, that was the United States, Western Europe, and Germany. Of course, it didn't happen there. It happened in what Lenin called the weakest chain, the weakest link in the chain of capitalism, which was Russia. So this is, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. So a lot of Marxists think that revolution will happen in the more backwards countries. But I still think that in the United States, there's a lot of revolutionary potential because there are a lot of political issues like the oppression of the black nation, which right now is manifesting itself in spontaneous political violence, and which I don't believe spontaneous political violence is productive, but it's manifesting itself that way anyway. And out of it there are manifesting several organizations like the black militias, like I think it's called the No Fucking Around Coalition. One of those, it's a huge black militia all over the country, and white people have had their own militias for the longest time, so this is kind of a counterbalance to them. Unfortunately, Black Lives Matter is not like a disciplined political organization with some sort of socialist ideology, but that's really what this kind of revolutionary fervor in the United States needs. It needs a political organization to harness the frustration of the masses for concrete political purposes. And in the United States, we need a lot of things. We need a revitalization of infrastructure in the country. We need a revitalization of industry in the country. The United States is completely deindustrialized, basically. All our industrial jobs, which form the backbone of the production of value in an economy, because labor creates all the value in an economy, has been outsourced to the third world, and their labor is being hyper-exploited. This is wrong in so many ways. And here, this kind of goes to the question that Caleb asked. Hey, Caleb, how can American socialists change to win? Well, we have to organize. A project that Caleb and I are working on is the Center for Political Innovation that you should all check out. We're going to have a conference, our first retreat, actually, in early September, that perhaps you guys could check out. It's going to be very cool. It's going to be like the kickoff of our organization. We were going to have a conference that unfortunately had to be canceled because of the coronavirus and the pandemic and everything. But what we got to do is organize, and we have to organize, an organization that's going to fight for working families, for the working class, and that means everyone, all of the working class, no matter what your race, no matter what your creed, gender orientation, whatever. The focus has to be on class, not identity or anything that lacks class. Of course, identity plays into it, but class needs to be the focus of the conversation. How should we leftists sabotage and spread our ideas? How should we explain Marxism to normies, people who don't understand? Well, I think really to propagate and to spread Marxist information, this has to be done through media vehicles. I mean, you could talk to your friends and try and convince them of Marxism and stuff, but it needs to be an organized effort. This is one of the things CPI wants to work on as well. So. I believe JP Morgan said that the dollar will most likely lose its reign as a reserve currency. Thought on that and cryptocurrency to the rescue. Well, I do think that fiat currencies are inherently unsustainable, but how long it's going to be until the grand collapse of the dollar and the euro and all that, I mean, nobody knows. It could be, there's no way to tell. I mean, as for cryptocurrency, I'm a bit skeptical about it, to be honest. I did some research into it. I thought about getting into it, but you know, when it comes to the supremacy of currencies, the way I see it is that it's completely connected to geopolitics, and like most other things in the economy, the government that can enforce with the threat of violence its economic will is most likely going to be the one that wins. That's the United States right now. But like I said before, China and Russia have taken significant steps to breaking their dependency on the dollar. So that's it's possible that the dollar will take a hit in the coming months, but I don't think it's going to be collapsing anytime soon. But I think a Eurasian alternative is forming, which is very good news, I think. It's most likely that Europe will become the center of the imperial capitalist world when the dollar collapses. I think, in economic terms, Europe already is the United States. Okay, the United States is, of course, the center of the imperial capitalist world, but I would say it's on the decline, and that Europe is right now trending upwards in relation to the United States. Is there a strong pro-Soviet stance among the younger Russian population? No. One thing I can tell you is that in Russia, basically the demographic of people who support communism is the exact opposite of what you see in the United States. In the United States, a lot of young people support communism, actually, because, you know, they're growing up in the butt end of capitalism, basically. I know because I'm a young person. And the older people tend to be the more supportive of capitalism, while the younger people tend to be more supportive of socialism, communism, social democracy, etc. And if you ask an old person, you know, if an old person talks to a young communist about communism, they'll say, go to a communist, you just like communism because you didn't live in a communist country, or you should go to a communist country to figure out what it's like, whatever. But in Russia, it's the opposite. The old people love communism. I'm doing a video about World War II and Stalin right now, and I've been doing some interviews with people who literally fought in the Soviet army under Joseph Stalin against the Nazis, and they are the strongest supporters of communism. They're still using rhetoric about like the proletariat and world revolution and socialism. They're the most avid communists. Nowadays, the youth here, and don't get me wrong, there are youth supporters of communism, obviously. There's a lot of young members of the Communist Party here, no doubt. But mostly the youth have adopted a more bourgeois kind of ideology, I would say. What do you make of the division between Germany and the USA, Nord Stream 2, etc.? Yeah, this is a really good question, because the US and Germany for a while now have had a wedge driven between them. I think the Nord Stream 2 pipeline is a great example of how free markets aren't really free, because you know, if a truly free market system was the system in which Western capitalist countries were existing, then the United States would not be able to bully Europe. They wouldn't be able to try and bully Europe into not signing a more profitable deal with Russia for natural gas than continuing to import this super expensive stuff from the United States. If the free market was truly free, Germany should have no problem building the pipeline with Russia. But it's not politically suitable with the world's biggest imperialist power, the United States, and so the relationship between Germany and the U.S. has soured because of it. And all Germany is trying to do is try and get a profitable deal on on bringing natural gas into the country. And again, let's not forget, Germany has some of the highest energy prices in the world. It's really expensive, and that actually can be attributed to Merkel's green energy policy. It sounds good on. I mean, it sounds good in theory, and I know the left in Europe, or the left in Europe, likes to support these green policies that Merkel is putting through. But the people who are doing most of the polluting are the capitalists, and the people who are doing most of the paying for this green energy program are the workers. So is that fair? That's the way the capitalists are going to do green energy. And another thing about the division between Germany and the U.S. is Trump's recent withdrawal. Trump's recent promise to withdraw troops from Germany. I think 12,000. But the German capitalists are going crazy over this. Obviously, the super rich capitalists who like the idea of relying on the United States for military protection against Russia, but it's good that the United States military is leaving there just in general, but who knows what that's going to lead to? I mean, who knows if they're just going to go somewhere else? And the rest of the American military is everywhere else in the world anyway. All right, I'm going to go through a couple more questions, and then, sorry guys, I'm starving, so I'm going to have to go eat soon. Too much coffee, not enough food today. This is a good question. Any book recommendations on Soviet history? I can give you a ton. I have one. It's in Russian though, and but you can get it in English. It's called the History of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. I'll show you the Russian one right now. Just a second. It's pretty cool. This is from the Soviet Union, and I can read in Russian, so I've been reading it. This one's from 1960, but there's a bunch of editions, and I know Progress Publishers has editions of this. History of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. It's obviously from the Communist Party's perspective, and it's not just a history of the Communist Party, of course. It's the history of the Soviet Union, because the history of the Communist Party is inseparable from the history of the Communist Party is inseparable from the history of the Soviet Union. So I suggest that. I would also suggest another good one is, this is more like the history of, just a second. This is more a history of Stalingrad. I mean, the title gives it away, Stalingrad. Is written by one of my professors in university, actually. His name is Johann Helbeck. And for a book written in English by a Western professor, it's a very non-biased account of Stalingrad, because he actually takes this is mostly interviews with people, Soviet soldiers who fought in the war, in the battle. And he dispels a lot of myths about Stalingrad, actually, about, that the NKVD was not just shooting people who were retreating. They were put into penal battalions, and actually people who showed cowardice on the field were not just shot. They were actually given opportunities to redeem themselves and show heroism on the battlefield. And a lot of times, actually, these penal battalions, they were very dangerous. And a lot of times, if you redeemed yourself, you had a chance of accomplishing even greater feats of heroism than someone in a regular battalion would have had. So thoughts on Turkmenistan? What about Turkmenistan? Is Vasily Grossman's book on Stalingrad historical fiction accurate? I'm sorry, I haven't read it, so I'm not sure. I'll take one more question. The reason is because okay, thoughts on the protests in Russia's Far East. I'm sorry, I don't know that much about it. Thoughts on China? I mean, I support them as part of the Eurasian alternative to Western imperialism and Western capitalism. I don't think China is a capitalist country. I think it's a country on a socialist road of development. Is Turkmenistan the North Korea of Central Asia? Okay, I mean, I think I can answer that. I don't think it's the North Korea of Central Asia. Turkmenistan is like it's kind of it reminds me of Dagestan a little bit. I had no idea about these places until I moved to Russia and really got an understanding of like you know. I never met anyone from Turkmenistan in America. It was only after I came to Russia that I actually got a little exposed to their culture and everything. But I wouldn't say Turkmenistan is like North Korea. I would say it's more like the Wild West. I mean, a lot of these places in Central Asia are. I've been to Kazakhstan. Actually, I've actually been there, and it's like. I don't know. It's not socialist. The government doesn't really take that much of a hand in anything. I mean, it's kind of lawless. Yeah. I mean, obviously, you can't go around killing people. I don't want to defame the good name of Kazakhstan or Turkmenistan, but these places in Central Asia tend to be more like easygoing places. And also, Turkmenistan is not surrounded by imperialist enemies on all sides, and it hasn't had to create a fortress state for itself like North Korea has. Okay. I'll answer this one last question because I'm liking these questions. These are good questions. Thoughts on news about the Uyghurs? I know who they are. I've just never had to say that name. Sorry, one sec. Why am I comparing Turkmenistan to Kazakhstan? Well, I mean, they're kind of in the same region. That's why. I mean, I don't know anything very specific about their cultures or anything, but I mean, generally they have similar post-Soviet governments. Like, culturally they are very different countries. Yeah. But okay, so now about the Uyghurs. Okay, well, I mean, there's a lot of unconfirmed information about that place. I mean, I really don't think there's like a Holocaust going on there, like a lot of Western media sources are saying. I mean, but I think. I mean, it depends on who you ask, right? There's like Uyghurs who, however you say it. Sorry, I don't really know how to say it, but I have read quite a bit into it. There's people from this region who have been on on television supporting the Chinese narrative of what's going on. There's been others who, have supported the U.S. concentration camp narrative. But I mean, I really think I really don't think that the Western narrative on something that's going on in China is going to be really reliable until there's like really clear evidence. But it just seems like propaganda, Actually, yeah, I think that's going to be the last question. I'm pretty tired. It's like almost 11 here, and I've been working all day here in Moscow. But anyway, guys, thanks for coming to this live chat, second one on the channel. We covered a lot of topics, and I was happy to answer your questions. And stay tuned for the next videos. I'll probably try to do another live in about a week. So I'm going to try to make this a weekly thing. Let's see if we can keep up with that. So thank you all, and have a good night or good morning if you're in the United States. Good afternoon. Bye-bye.